What's up, everybody? And I welcome you to the very first episode of In the Mix. I am your host, Leah B. And in this episode, I will be talking about hip hop's early years. I will be discussing hip hop's birthplace, hip hop's musical roots, where hip hop got its name, and the four elements of hip hop. So let's get into it. So, the hip hop movement is not just a musical genre, it's a cultural movement. It started as an underground movement as well. It stemmed from block parties, and block parties became extremely popular in the New York City area during that time. It began in the South Bronx in the 70s. And block parties were extremely popular among the African American community as well. And block parties were considered an escape from all what was going around during that time in the Bronx with the crime, drugs, gangs, poverty. And the block parties were an avenue where the kids can get together and have a good time and not worry about all the craziness that was going around during that time. They would just come, relax, chill with their friends, eat, do all that good stuff. And the phrase hip hop was coined by a guy named Keith Cowboy Wiggins. He was a member of the Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five group. So he was like hanging out with his friend who just joined the military. And while he was like hanging out with his boy, he started scat singing and he just made up the words hip hop, hip hop, hip hop. And actually, he was just basically making fun of all the soldiers marching back and forth. So that's how hip hop got its name. The earliest mention of hip hop was in the 1950s and 60s. Hip hop's roots came from blues, R&B, and jazz. And the first artist to have a hip hop song was a guy by the name of Pig Meat Markham in 1968. And the song he had was called Here Comes the Judge. And the reason why the song was considered the first hip hop song because he was the first person to use boastful rhythmic lyrics. And you know how hip hop is very cocky, and the rappers think they know everything, and he was the very first one to do that. So that was the reason why it was known as the first hip hop song. And another person I did not know that was part of the hip hop movement was Muhammad Ali. He had an album, and basically the album was about him talking trash to his opponents. And you know how he was. He was very cocky, and he was just good at what he did. And at that time, he was known as Cassius Clay. This was right before he became a Muslim and converted to Islam. And the album was called I Am the Greatest. And that album was released in 1963, August of 1963. And also, he was also nominated for a Grammy for that album as well. And he was the first athlete to be signed to a Columbia Records as well. And the four elements of the hip hop movement, there are four elements to the hip hop movement, and they are DJing, graffiti, breakdance, and rhyming. The first element is graffiti. The graffiti movement was started by a guy named Tech 183 in 1972. He would, to get his name out there, he would tag, basically tagging means he would put his artwork on New York City subways. To get his name out there, he would tag his name, display his artwork, and he had awesome artwork as well when I was looking him up. And he became a local celebrity around New York City. And his influence was so huge that the New York City kids would emulate him. And they would display, they would thought they were artists too, so they would display their artwork as well on the walls of the New York subways. Graffiti wasn't just a local thing, it started catching on across the country. And the artists at that time would not only display other artworks, they would display their graffiti artwork as well across the country in art galleries and stuff like that. And the artwork would be displayed across the country. And it also caught on internationally as well. It artists in Europe and Japan would display their artwork, their graffiti artwork as well, in their art in the art galleries. The second element of the hip hop movement is breakdancing. Breakdancing contains four types of movement. It's the top rock, down rock, power moves, and freezes. Breaking was created in the black community as well in the early 1970s. The earliest breakdancers, they were known as the first generation b-boys, known as Trixie, Dancing Doug, and the legendary Smith twins and Clark Kent. There were also groups as well, b-boy groups that started popping up as well. And that group was known as the Zulu Kings. And by the 70s, the late 70s, breakdancing started to catch on nationally as well. It started to spread in other communities, such as the Latino community, the white community, and the Asian community as well. And the other pioneers of breakdancing were the Rocksteady crew and the New York City Breakers. The third element of the hip hop movement is DJing. And the person who helped usher the blueprint for a style of hip hop was a guy named Kool Herc. He was also credited with helping originate hip hop movement music in the Bronx as well. He was known as the father of hip hop because he was the first person to create dance breaks in songs using R&B records and other records as well. So he would focus on the short, heavy progression part of the song, meaning the drum beats of the song, which were known as um, the break. And that was the part that people absolutely loved. He would isolate the break and prolong it by changing between two record players. As one record player played and reached the end of the break, he will cue the second record back to the beginning of the first break, which allowed him to extend the second break in a short period of time, which was in 5 minutes. And that was known as the 5 minute loop of fury. And he also had another technique called the merry-go-round. And that's when the DJ switched from break to break at the height of the party. So the dance portion of the party. It was called the merry-go-round, and he started using the merry-go-round technique in his sets in 1972. And the songs he would use for the merry-go-round technique were mostly James Brown songs, which were Give It Up or Turn It Loose. And he would use this phrase called, it would be clap your hands, stomp your feet, and switching that to the record's break into the second record, which was the Bango Rock record. And that was made by the incredible Bongo band. And once he would use that break, he would use another song and switch the break from Bango Rock to the Mexican song, which was made by an English band named Babe Ruth. And there, during that time as well, there was a group, a spoken word group at that time that came out of Harlem at that time. The group was called The Last Poets. And the Last Poets were came out of the civil rights and the black nationalist movement of the 1960s. They were the first group to go number 29 on the Billboard Hot 200 album chart, and with their debut album, The Last Poets. And it also had a song name that was called On the Subway. And that album peaked at number 3 on the R&B and hip hop charts. The other pioneers of the hip hop movement were Grand Wizard Theodore, and he was known as the inventor of the scratching technique. In Africa Bambaataa, I know you heard of him. He had the song Planet Rock. Everybody and their mama sampled that sample. And Grandmaster Flash as well, he used the extended break just like DJ Kool Herc. So basically he kind of stole from him. And Grandmaster Flash was the first person to create the needle drop. So what that means is he will take the short drum beats by playing 2 copies of a record at the same time and moving the needle back and forth from one turntable back to the start of the break while the other song had played. And the last element of the hip hop movement is rhyming, which is known as rap music now. And I just wanted to give you guys a history lesson on rap. So rap can be traced back to Africa, long before hip hop even came about. And there was these groups in West Africa who were telling stories in a rhythmic way. They would use drums and other instruments as well to tell their stories. And those groups were acknowledged by modern day artists and spoken word artists. But hip hop itself, movement, the music portion of it didn't go mainstream until 1979. Because before that, they weren't known to be marketable. Hip hop was not known to be marketable at that time due to the poverty issue and where hip hop was birthed, the Bronx. and it wasn't accepted outside of the Bronx. So people thought that hip hop music was going to fade out just like disco did, which it didn't. As you can see, I'm talking about it now. And the first group to go mainstream was out of New Jersey. They were named the Sugar Hill Gang. And the single that made them extremely popular, that made hip hop go on to a national stage, was Rapper's Delight. I know you heard of it. Um, I would play it, but you guys can listen to it on YouTube. And that single hit the top 40 of the Billboard Hot 100 charts. And another guy who was part of hip hop's early years was Curtis Blow. He was the first rapper to be signed to a major label, which was Mercury Records. His biggest single to date was The Breaks. And it goes, "These are the breaks. Break it up, break it up, break it up, let's go." Something like that. And that album, that single, I should say, sold 500,000 copies, and it was sampled by basically everybody in America, well, in the rap game over the years. And I believe that without hip hop's early years, I believe that hip hop wouldn't be as prevalent as it is today. So I thank you guys for listening, and stay tuned for more episodes. I will be in the future. I will be talking about not just hip hop. So this is a music history podcast. I will be talking about the next episodes will be about the 80s hip hop, which are considered the golden years of hip hop, and the 90s hip hop. And I will be talking about R&B and gospel. And eventually, hopefully, I'll be having some musical artists or special guests when I get there, to come to my show. And I thank you for listening, and thank you for listening to episode 1 of In the Mix. I am your host, Leah B. Until next time, peace and love.